Welcome to this week's episode of the Let's Talk Boxing podcast, brought to you from SimBoxx. Of course, I'm your host, Luke SimBoxx. This week, I'll be joined by Rich from Boxing Bits UK. I'm sure you've seen him over on our social media channels. He's been doing little bits and pieces for SimBoxx, and he'll be a big part of the team moving forward. And we're going to get straight into it. We're on the back of a huge, historic, monumental, light heavyweight unification fight that went down Wembley Arena. Artur Beterbiev, the big feared Russian, come over and he took on Anthony Yarde. It was barbaric. It was brutal. It was old school. Rich, what a great fight.
Mate, absolutely unbelievable. Almost a fight of the year contender straight away in January, I think, Luke. I think Beterbiev's just got that European style. Horrible to beat, horrible to fight against. Doesn't look pretty all the time, but he's just a tough man. And I think Yarde was always going to have a little bit of a struggle, although he done a fantastic job, and I can't give him enough credit. Beterbiev's a tough guy, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going into the fight, we all knew about Beterbiev. He come in with a 18-0 record, 18 wins, 18 stoppages. He's never needed to go the distance. We've seen him behind the cards in fights. We've seen him troubled and dropped by Callum Johnson in other fights. And one way or another, he's always bludgeoned his way to victory. And I think it's fair to say that as a unified light heavyweight world champion that's beat other world champions, that's beat other top contenders, Saturday night was most definitely the most dangerous and the toughest fight that he's been in his career so far. Anthony Yarde, for me, I predicted a Beterbiev win. He went on and won in 8 rounds, of course. But it wasn't the one-sided beatdown that we thought it could have been, or that it should have been. Anthony Yarde put on a career-best performance. He's won plaudits upon plaudits for his performance, and rightly so. The fight was to-in and fro-in. It kind of felt like, and we'll get into a more in-depth breakdown further in the podcast, but it kind of felt like it was Beterbiev's fight, and Yarde was keeping up with him. But he had moments of success, and I think the whole trajectory of Anthony Yarde's career now has really took a different path. We knew he was on fringe world title level, but now he's fully established himself as one of the best light heavyweights in the world with that performance. And yeah, there'll be a big year ahead for Anthony Yarde. But let's just focus on Artur Beterbiev. The fact that Frank Warren was able to bring him over to the UK, I thought was a real coup. I think it was a real good moment for British boxing that, we weren't losing one of these big fights for our fighters to America, to Vegas, to Madison Square Garden, or one of those places. We see it normally on ESPN or DAZN in America or Showtime, and it's on at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But we had this on primetime UK. It wasn't on pay-per-view, so again, shout out to Frank Warren for that. And I've touched on it already, Rich, but it just really felt like an old school feel, didn't it? The fans were passionate. There was, the undercard wasn't stacked. I think that's fair to say. So it really built up to that main event, that everybody was there for the main event, for the two main protagonists in Beterbiev and Yarde. It was raucous. He was fully behind Anthony Yarde. Beterbiev played his role as the Bond villain coming in there to ruin everyone's dreams and hopes, and the dreams and hopes of Anthony Yarde, and he absolutely done that. But Rich, what an atmosphere, what a moment for British boxing, as you rightly say there, up there already as fight of the year candidate, and it's only our second biggest show of 2023 so far.
And mate, 100%. And I think a lot of that we've got to give credit to Anthony Yarde for. I think when he that second fight against Lyndon Arthur, I think everyone started to appreciate that the improvements that he was showing. And I think everyone started to get behind him at that point. I mean, a lot of us knew already that he was up there. You don't trouble Kovalev if you're not a special kind of fighter. But I think people started to appreciate him a bit more after that fight. And I think I was up there for the media day, and everybody, like you say, there were so many Yarde fans there. Not what you expected it to be, but it was full of Yarde. Beterbiev, I think he's been there, he's done it, he knew what to expect. He's always going to be cool, calm, and collected in them situations, and he done it. He was exactly the same then. But I think Yarde, I think everyone's starting to accept that he is world level, like what you just said. I think he proved it, and I think he gave himself a lot of credit on Saturday night for what he done. I think it was a tremendous performance against a tough guy, as I said. And yeah, I think the fans are going to get behind him from here on in, because I think he's got potential to be that world champion. It's not, the thing is that light heavyweight, it's not a stacked division. I think you've got your Bivals, but then when you come down from Bivol, you've got your Beterbievs, then you've got your Callum Smiths, your Ramirez. But I think Bivol's out on his own. But I think after that, any other night, Yard, if he got another, I mean, he might not ever be better than Beterbiev, but I don't think he's that far behind. And on another night, if he gets a good shot, and he could have beaten him, I think he is that good now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was such a contrast in the two fighters, both with the personality, the press conference, the weigh-in, all kind of went off without too much of a hiccup. There was no need for insults or below the belt back and forth like we've seen with Eubank Smith the week before, with some really shady things being said at that press conference. This fight sold itself. There was no argy-bargy, there was no pushing and shoving. It didn't need that. And again, that all went into the fact that it had the old school feel, that it was just a real fight. I think with Anthony Yarde, I was pleasantly surprised with his approach to the fight. I think when we came into that first round, and the general consensus was that he was going to have to empty the tank within 3 and just really put it on Beterbiev and see if we can catch him cold. We've seen Callum Johnson, as we've mentioned, put Beterbiev down. I think that was in the 4th round before Beterbiev got up and stopped Callum Johnson. And we know, you look at Anthony Yarde, he looks like he's chiseled from stone, doesn't he? And we know he carries power. We've seen how he took out Lyndon Arthur. And although take away Kovalev and Lyndon Arthur, there's not too much by way of credible opponents. No disrespect on the record of Anthony Yarde to suggest that he could carry on into world level and carry on destroying these guys. So I think the general consensus was that he was going to go in there and empty the tank, throw the kitchen sink at Beterbiev in those early rounds in the hope of catching him cold, knocking him out, and winning the world titles. But he had more to the game plan than that. And although ultimately it proved unsuccessful, I was pleasantly surprised that he went in there showing some boxing ability, because going back to the fact that these guys are chalk and cheese and the worlds apart as personalities, as people, the way they live their lives, but also as boxers, their careers. Anthony Yarde, 12 amateur fights. Artur Beterbiev, over 300 amateur fights, a real established amateur career, which is why he turned over late as a pro. Anthony Yarde turned pro, I think he was 18 or 19. But he went in there and he's shown considerable boxing ability in those early rounds. And there was left hooks, there was overhand rights. His footwork wasn't perfect, but it was better than what you would have expected from an Anthony Yarde. And I think we have to give credit to Tunde Ajayi. Like, I'm not his biggest fan. He's very controversial on social media. He was very brave with the stoppage, which we'll move into. But the game plan, you see this flashy pad work that Floyd Mayweather made popular, where they do the little routines. It's not for everybody. Other trainers kind of look down on it and say it's almost like a dance routine, if you like. It's all sequenced and you don't really take too much from it. But who are we to argue with it if Floyd Mayweather mastered the art of these pad sequences, really rapid punch combinations. And you kind of questioned how much Tunde Ajayi could influence Anthony Yarde in this fight, but they come up with a great game plan. And those first 3 rounds, I thought, was maybe Beterbiev rounds. You could maybe split it 2-1 to Beterbiev. But I was really, really impressed with the boxing ability of Anthony Yarde. We've seen him get outboxed by Lyndon Arthur in the first fight for 12 rounds, when Lyndon Arthur was a one-arm fighter for the majority of the fight. But I think he's got underrated boxing ability, and I think on that note, I'd give a lot of credit to Tunde Ajayi for the work that he's done with Anthony Yarde.
You know what? I am going to agree with you and disagree with you. I think the improvements in the boxing he showed was amazing, but I don't think he lost the first 3 rounds. I think he was working the jab fantastically. I watched it back again today on mute, and I was hoping to have the same opinion, and I actually did. I think he was 2-1 up within 3. I thought he was using the jab brilliantly. I thought the footwork was the best we've ever seen. I thought his head movement was fantastic. I just feel he's just not built to do that for 12 rounds. And that, I think, was the major problem for him. I think the first 3 or 4 rounds, he looked fantastic. Like you say, I think he looked better than ever, boxing ability. But I don't think, again, something you mentioned, he only had, 12 amateur fights. And I think it sometimes comes back to the fundamentals. Once he got past that first 3 or 4 rounds, which I thought he was up comfortably, and he started to get a bit tired. He kind of not runs out of ideas, but he hasn't got the know-how as most of the like your Beterbievs, as how to get your way around them sort of rounds, if you know what I mean. When he's hurt, sometimes it's scruffy. Sometimes he could probably hang on a little bit more. He just hasn't got the fundamentals that some of these guys have. But I think the first 4 rounds, I had him 3-1 up. And then I think that's when he got a little bit tired. And I think Beterbiev, people like that know, they can see it in their eyes when someone changes and the style changes throughout a fight. And I think we all see that happen round 4 to 5. He went from moving a lot, head, foot, to being quite static and coming forward in straight lines. And then he was easier to hit, which then just plays into Beterbiev's hands because he's old school. He knows what to do in them situations. And if someone's tired, he might be 38. He will get to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the prime example of being fit and being fighting fit. You know, you look at the two physiques, and don't get me wrong, there's not an ounce of fat on Artur Beterbiev. But you look at the muscly physique of Anthony Yarde, he is much the musclier man. But I think, again, I'll give you credit because I've not scored the fight round by round. I very rarely do that, to be honest. I kind of go with the eye test of how I feel the fight's going. And maybe that's why I had the impression that Beterbiev was ahead simply because he felt like he was controlling the fight, that I felt Anthony Yarde was dancing to Beterbiev's tune. And every time he did have success, which he did, he had considerable success. 9 times out of 10, Beterbiev was firing back. You know, you'd see Anthony Yarde, if he used to break the rounds up into 3 1-minute rounds. My good friend Kaya, who works on the Love Boxing TV channel, he broke it down. He says he scores rounds first minute, second minute, third minute, and then works out the winner of the round that way. And I think that would have been a clever way of scoring this fight because Yarde would start the round a little bit slow, come into it, and then Beterbiev would answer. And you felt like maybe similar to how people say about Anthony Joshua, you know, when you're that muscly, that these muscles are going to sap you of energy, that they're going to be using up oxygen that could be used in other ways. And that's why I felt that Yarde was having success, but Beterbiev was controlling the fight. Yarde was dancing to Beterbiev's tune, and you could see him tired considerably. One thing that I will give Anthony Yarde the utmost respect for, amongst other things in that fight, his bravery and his heart cannot be questioned after this. Not that it has been before, but he was tested like most of the light heavyweights have not been tested that haven't fought Beterbiev. There was moments in that fight when he could have took a knee, he could have looked for a way out, and to his credit, he looked to answer everything. And as we moved into round 8, he was actually doing quite well in the 7th round, and Beterbiev come back strong. And then in round 8, it was the honey punch, if you like, for Beterbiev. That straight right, it caught Yarde clean on the chin. He goes down, gets up at the count. I've heard people, again, I don't want to quote this directly because, you know, so don't take my word for it and come hunting me down on social media if I'm wrong. But Steve Gray, the referee, actually told Anthony Yarde when he's down on one knee, you don't have to get up till 8 or words to that effect, that he kind of advised him on the count, which if that's true, you know, I'd have to go back and see that. If that is true, that is scandalous, you know. But again, take nothing away from Yarde. He got up from the count. Beterbiev went to put it on him, landed a couple of shots, missed a couple of shots, and then Sunday's up in the corner. He's threw the towel in. Beterbiev's the winner. Round 8 TKO. Rich, did you think it was possibly an early stoppage? Do you think it was one of these situations where trying is saving a fight for another day, that it could be one punch too many? But then we've seen in the past with, say, George Groves against Carl Froch, where that looked a potentially too early stoppage. Could it be that the other fighter opposing, say, Anthony Yarde in this case, and Beterbiev is known as a killer, is known as a good finisher, so therefore Sunday seen the writing written on the wall, same way Howard Foster might have seen Carl Froch coming in for George Groves, and therefore kind of give him that respect of, you know, you're going to get took out here. What did you take from it? Did you think it was an early stoppage, or do you think Sunday deserves a round of applause there?
Do you know what? Sunday gets so much bad press, critics online, but I've got nothing but respect for him for that stoppage. I think it was perfect. I think he was thinking about his fighter. I think he knows Anthony better than anyone else. Sorry, no matter what we all think about him, he sees him every day in the gym, and he knows what he's got. if he sees the tank empty, and I think he knows what he's got left, and I think he done that for love. I think him and Anthony are so close, and people can't see that. They've got such a tight relationship, and I generally don't think he wants him to get hurt. And I think if he's saying that was the end, I think we've got to all respect that and give him credit for it. I mean, I actually sent you a WhatsApp, Luke. I actually predicted a round 8 stoppage with Beterbiev. That's what I predicted, and I didn't want it to happen. But do I think it was early? No, I don't. I think we've got to give credit for Tunde for that. Massive credit as well. We all love to give him critics online, but this just respects him when he does something right as well for his fighter, because that is the most important thing, that Anthony come out safe, ready to go again. And I think Tunde's given that chance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a saying that's often said in boxing that, you get brave fighters, but you don't need a brave trainer. They're not the ones in there at the end of the punches. So yeah, I'll agree on that. Even if somebody like Anthony Yarde is not going to give up, we've seen and we've said already in the fight that he could have had the opportunity to take a knee and to get himself out of the fight, and he didn't. He fought on, and he would have fought on into that round 8. Post fight again, we'll give Anthony Yarde credit because it's hard not to, especially there's not very often you'll see a fighter on the end of a 8-round TKO. I say, for instance, if you was to read this result on BoxRec, or something like that, and not know the ins and the outs of the fight, you'd see Artur Beterbiev win TKO, RKO, and you'd be like, oh, it's it's an ABC fight, but this was anything but. And Anthony Yarde, post fight, I thought he was very gracious in defeat. He could have tried throwing Tunde under the bus, as you say. They're very, very close out the ring. There's almost more than a brotherhood. There's a relationship there that goes deep. He was very respectful. He had a word with Beterbiev. I thought it was quite nice that Beterbiev said, the inexperience got you there. He said that it was his hardest fight. And he said that Beterbiev's for now, but Yarde's for the future, which we remain to be seen. Did you see the post-fight interview in the dressing room with, I think BT Sport done with Anthony Yarde?
Is that when they was getting the stitches done?
Yeah, so that was a great moment. But then there was a moment where they spoke, and Anthony Yarde had his shades on, and he was like, the vanity's still got to be there. And I think Anthony Yarde's such a great character. Again, you mentioned about Tunde Ajayi maybe getting some of the bad press, and yeah, he can be controversial and saying things like he's better than Andre Durrell and not Andre Durrell, Andre Ward. Some of the things that he said in the past about Anthony Yarde that kind of put Anthony Yarde on a pedestal that he didn't deserve to be on ahead of that Kovalev fight. And I think that kind of passes down into Anthony Yarde. So some of these people that are disliking Tunde Ajayi, or maybe disrespecting Tunde Ajayi, or maybe not liking what Tunde Ajayi is saying, that then kind of filters through to Anthony Yarde, which couldn't be further than true, because that interview for me epitomised what Anthony Yarde's about. He's humble, he's honest, he's funny, he's ambitious. Even in the moments after a defeat, which must be so raw for a fighter to kind of try and be open and be honest, and they must have 1,000,001 things going through their mind, especially in such a high-profile fight where he thought he was going to become unified light heavyweight champion of the world. He's just been stopped, and to have that kind of humility to take the time, and it wasn't no 30-second interview. I think it went on for 8 or 9 minutes. He spoke really well. He brought in one of his friends that he works with outside of boxing, talk about the community work that they do, a fantastic scheme that they've got going down there, to stop knife crime and stuff like that. They're working with Adidas. So I just thought that Anthony Yarde's stock's risen both as a fighter and as a person.
I think it's like you said, though. I think, like you said, at points in that fight, Anthony Yarde was pushing him back. We don't often see that. But then again, I think as fighters, when you're in there, sometimes you have to respect greatness. And I think this, as fans and as fighters, he must have known what he was up against. Once you get out and you finish that fight and you've seen what Beterbiev is all about, he must just think, right, I've held my own. I've got to give a good account of myself, but this man's special, and it's going to take some stopping to beat him. I think sometimes you just got to accept, and I think kind of that's what he did, and he did it gracefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So inevitably, Rich, as soon as one fight ends, us as boxing fans, as media channels, we ultimately look to what's next. We hardly give these guys time to breathe. We know they're going to take time off and spend it with family, friends, go on holiday and whatnot. But ultimately, we want to know what's going to be next, whether it be 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line. And with the light heavyweight division, as you say, he's maybe not stacked tremendously, but at the very top, we have Artur Beterbiev undefeated, 19-0. He holds 3 of the world titles. We've got a Mr. Dmitry Bivol, undefeated, 21-0. He's got the WBA belt. And that is one of the best fights that can be made in boxing. As a pure boxing fan, your heart's screaming like undisputed next. But as a boxing fan that understands the business side of things, it's not close to happening, is it? You know, I think we got the Callum Smith situation, which we'll touch on. He's the WBC mandatory challenger, and Mauricio Sullivan saying that mandatory challenge supersedes the undisputed fight, which I can't see happening. But then
they're going to follow it through by the sounds of it. They're not going to let that go by what I've been hearing this week. I think they're going to put in writing that they want the fight, aren't they?
Yeah, and then you've also got to factor in Canelo and what Canelo wants to do next. The grapevine saying that the John Ryder fight is all but signed, potentially in the UK, which on a side note would be a fantastic thing for British boxing. We're talking about bringing over Artur Beterbiev, Alexander Usyk for the Joshua fight a couple of years back. We're getting these big fights, Tyson Fury at Wembley. Canelo is as big, or if not bigger than all of that, if we got him over to the UK. We wait to see what he's going to do with if he wants to take a rematch with Bivol and where that fits in, because Bivol talks about greatness and wanting to become undisputed, and that it's not all about the money. But when Canelo comes knocking with Canelo money, people tend to take that fight, and we can't begrudge him that. Boxers' careers are so short that they've got to get the biggest paydays, and belts are nice, but belts don't put money on the table, do they? They don't put food on the table, they don't put the holes in the bank. That's the biggest fights, and Canelo is the fight for Dmitry Bivol. So we hope for an undisputed fight at some point in 2023, but first and foremost, Rich, it looks like it's going to be Beterbiev versus Callum Smith. I could see that fight coming up quite soon, maybe like around June, because we know Smith is out in March. It's not been confirmed yet, but he'll be fighting on a Matchroom DAZN bill in his hometown of Liverpool. We can't see that being too much of a dangerous fight, I wouldn't have thought, if Beterbiev's lying in wait. And post-fight, there was a lot of clamour, Tony Bellew being one of them. We know the Smith brothers are going to back their boy. But there was other people as well that was calling for Callum Smith to take this fight, saying that it was almost a given, you know. And I couldn't get my head around that, Rich. We put it in the SimBoxx group chat, and I said, you know, full respect to Callum Smith. What he done at 168 pounds was great. He beat George Groves. He won the World Boxing Super Series with the Muhammad Ali Trophy. But he was ultimately beaten by Canelo. He's moved up to light heavyweight. He's had a couple of wins, nothing outstanding. You know, and I mean this with all due respect to Callum Smith, because Callum Smith's one of my favourite fighters. But I don't see how somebody can honestly say with full confidence that Callum Smith is the kryptonite to Artur Beterbiev, as if it's a given, you know, as if this is some sort of walkover fight, because Beterbiev's a walkover for nobody.
Mate, 100%. You know what I'm like? I love all the Smiths. And Callum Smith, you know, he's top of the tree, let's be honest, out of all of them. But he's never fought anyone like Beterbiev. And I think between a fight between them two, he'll be too easy for Beterbiev to hit. He's not a boxer who moves around on his feet. He hasn't got too much head movement, Callum Smith. So that's the first thing that come into my head when, like we was chatting about, a lot of people giving Smith giving it almost a given, as you say. But the way he fights, he comes in straight lines. He hasn't got too much movement in the ring. And for someone like Beterbiev and the knowledge he has, I just think it'd be quite easy for Beterbiev to hit him, if I'm honest. I don't think he stops Callum Smith, because I think Callum Smith's one very tough guy. I actually think he will do the 12 rounds. But I don't think he beats Beterbiev, and I definitely won't have him as favourite. Definitely not.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm not writing Callum Smith off, because I think he's got the capabilities to go in there and give anyone a hard night's work. I just think that Beterbiev starts a favourite, and, you know, Callum Smith would have a puncher chance. We know he's a devastated puncher. We've seen him knock people out for fun. I think, and this is more to do with how great I think Beterbiev is rather than how not great Smith is, if that makes sense. Because the only one that I give a 50-50 chance with Beterbiev is Bivol, and that's down to the boxing ability of Bivol. And we know Beterbiev is not just a wrecking ball. He's not a Deontay Wilder, if you like, that's going to go in there and just look for the stoppage. As heavy-handed as he is, he does produce his knockouts. You look at his record of 19-0, 19 stoppages, as we keep saying.
He wears his opponents down slowly, doesn't he?
Yeah,
and he grinds them down to the point where they don't want to go no more.
Yeah, that's it. You don't have the amateur pedigree that he has if you can't box alongside that. So I see him and Bivol as a 50-50 fight. It's who can implement their style in the fight best wins that fight. Any other fighter in the 175-pound division, I give a puncher's chance. And Cam Smith is a huge puncher, so he's got a big puncher's chance, but nothing more than that. Beterbiev starts as a favourite. I might catch a lot of flack for this, and I'm here for it. If people want to break it down with me on Twitter or Instagram, hit me up with the arguments, because we're here for it. That's what we're all for. Debates, healthy boxing debates is what makes the sport great. It's what we want as fans. But yeah, with all due respect, Artur Beterbiev is, for me, top 5 pound-for-pound boxers on the planet at the minute. Not to go off on a tangent, but I'll give it Usyk number 1, Inoue number 2, Crawford number 3, Spence number 4, and then Beterbiev number 5. And I think Beterbiev's great. I think he's the number 1 in the division at the minute. I think he's beat better opposition in better fashion than Bivol, but Bivol's right there as number 2, and it's a bit of a big gap to the rest of the chasing pack. In terms of Yarde, Rich, what next for him? I thought in the lead up to his fight, and I said it in my breakdown that we had on the SimBoxx YouTube channel, that he's not had that bridging fight, that gatekeeper-like fight, if you like. He jumped in with Kovalev, which I thought was too soon. He then went in with Lyndon Arthur. He was beaten. He beat him at Lyndon in the rematch in emphatic fashion. And then he's had a couple of knockover jobs, if you like, with all due respect. And then he's gone in again at the very elite of the division. I thought he could have done with taking on somebody like a Jean Pascal or a Joe Smith Jr. in preparation for this fight. We knew this fight was lingering for a while. There was talks of Anthony Yarde and Joshua Buatsi, which is a fight I put on the SimBoxx Twitter channel. See people's opinion on that fight, because once upon a time that was one of the most desired fights in British boxing. What next for Anthony Yarde, Rich?
We almost said it for me, mate. Joe Smith Jr. I think that was a fight I actually kind of wanted to see before this one, and I think you've probably got to go back to. I think it just makes sense putting them two together. They've obviously both fought. Beterbiev both lost, and I think you can't. Although I think he is world class, Anthony, I think, like you say, he's never had that one to get him used to them world title fights. And I think we'd all love to see Buatsi. I think that's the one I'd love to see if I really had to pick it. But I think the logical one is the Joe Smith. I think that just makes sense.
What a great fight.
See where they're both at, get them both up and running, and then the winner can move on from there.
Again, I put it on Twitter and I said, if you told me 5 years ago that Anthony Yarde, although unsuccessful, would fight for 2 world titles before Joshua Buatsi has even won a final eliminator, I would have called you crazy. But here we are in 2023. And Joshua Buatsi is such a great fighter, and he's such a great guy. He's not the most outspoken. He's not as charismatic as Anthony Yarde out of the ring. In the ring, he's absolute mustard. But I'm not quite sure what's going on with him in the zone. He's moved out to America. He trains out there now. He's got some good wins on his record. He beat Craig Richards. He beat Richard Bolotniks. Won the British title. Anthony Yarde kind of, past that British title scene, the European title scene, that kind of thing. Obviously, he's got the win over Lyndon Arthur. But yeah, I just think it's nuts that Anthony Yarde's fought for the world title twice, again unsuccessfully, but he's been at the top table twice. And Josh Buatsi, who is the Olympic guy, he medalled at the Olympics. He came in with that big Olympic background. He was a big signing for Matchroom, and they've marketed him as a future superstar. But we're 5, 6, almost 7 years down the line now since his professional debut, and he's not looking. Maybe if he gets a voluntary against Dimitri Bivol somewhere, a backdoor opportunity, because Bivol's an in-house fighter with Matchroom and DAZN. I don't see where Buatsi is going.
But you know what? I think we've all got our own opinions, and although I think what Eddie Hearn has done for boxing and British boxing is amazing, I think DAZN has held back some fighters. I think it's going to be harder for him to match. I mean, like any promotions, he's probably got easy matches that he can make in-house, but I think when you're trying to bring other fighters into a platform that they've now built, I think it makes life more difficult. And I'm going to be honest, I think that's actually held a lot of fighters back. I think Sky Sports is where everyone wants to be. And I think when you're on Sky Sports, the fights are going to come no matter what. I think, me personally, I don't think DAZN's helped him. But that's my opinion. And again, each to their own.
Yeah, I think we could spend a whole podcast speaking about the pitfalls of moving to DAZN for Eddie Hearn. This fight, funny enough, that we've just been talking about in terms of Beterbiev and Yarde, is another big fight night for Frank Warren. And some people are saying that he's the leading UK promoter now. I know we've done our end of year boxing podcast awards for British Promoter of the Year, and we give it to Ben Shalom for 2022. But Frank Warren was back in that conversation. He was written off so many times, and for so long it looked like the only golden goose, you like that he had, was Tyson Fury, but now he's developing other stars alongside that, Anthony Yarde being one of them. So yeah, I think
it's almost like he went quiet, didn't he? He sort of like come back all of a sudden the last 2 years. I love it because Eddie Hearn did take over, and Frank Warren, he's been around he's been around since as long as I can remember, and he's come back and he's putting on the biggest and best shows in the country. Like you say, we give it to Ben Shalom because he's a new guy, but I think we've got to give massive, massive respect to what Frank Warren's doing again in the sport.
hats off to Frank Warren, back involved in big time boxing. We know he's been around for 35, 40 years now and still delivering alongside Bob Arum himself in 1991. It's crazy. I think there was a moment on a podcast with Steve Bunce, the Five Live, that I heard that it was 38 years ago that Frank Warren and Bob Arum first worked together on a show, which I think was an amazing start. I wasn't even born, and I wasn't even close to being born then 38 years ago. So shout out to our older listeners. But speaking of big fight announcements, being involved in big time boxing, Frank Warren, of course, will be involved in, and I don't know if that's the right build up to say big time boxing, big fight events, but it is for a certain sector a big fight, arguably the biggest fight that can be made in this YouTube boxing era, and we've seen it right before the main event on Saturday, the unified light heavyweight world title fight between Artur Beterbiev and Anthony Yarde, which was an all-time classic. Right before that was the first face-off for Jake Paul against Tommy Fury. The second, third, or fourth time this fight's been announced, and for one reason or another, it's fallen through. Rich, whether we try and avoid it or not, it's going to be everywhere on social media. Your kids are going to know about it. Your nephews, your nieces, they're all going to know about it. Everyone's going to be talking about it. But was that the right moment for this fight to be officially announced? Was they trying to grasp the hardcore boxing audience? It was all a bit pantomime, with Tommy Fury taking his top off. I don't know what he's doing there. Jake Paul recording on Instagram as the face-off's about to take place. It was all a bit bizarre. It was all a bit WWE. We all know where I sit on the YouTube boxing scene. It's not really my thing. But this seems bigger than YouTube boxing in a way. This seems to, it's not boxing, it's not YouTube boxing, it's almost an event in of itself.
Listen, mate, let's be honest, absolutely madness. Crazy, isn't it? The whole bloody thing. I think you're right. Was it the right time to announce it? Probably not. But I think we've all got to accept that it is going to become a part of boxing. I'm learning it. I mean, I wasn't alive 38 years ago. 38 years ago. Actually, I was born 38 years ago. And my kids are teaching me this. I'm learning off them. And I think, I mean, I have some of my boys like 20, and some of his fans weren't into boxing. The last 2 years, not only the YouTube got them into it, but they're starting to now recognise pro boxers and getting more into it. So I think at some point, we've got to accept that it is bringing bums to the seats, as they say. Although the purists are not going to like it, because there's guys out there who've been training their whole life in the gym, sweating, working their nuts off, and they're getting peanuts. And they're not where they are. But I think at some point we've got to accept it is bringing attention, and it's bringing money to the sport. When we all think about it, that's what they're all here for, promoters and fighters. It's all about money now, and that's what it's bringing.
Yeah, that's it. This fight certainly is going to sell to the casual market and to the YouTube market. I think it's interesting that it's out in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be on Sunday, the February 26th. So that'll be interesting how that translates to UK time, as we say. I think there's a lot of pressure on Tommy Fury here. I think you look at the bookies, the bookies odds from what I've seen on Sky Bet, other betting markets are available. Price Jake Paul up as the slight odds-on favourite, which is bizarre, thinking that Tommy Fury is a career boxer. Jake Paul started off as a Disney kid. He was doing this YouTube boxing. It seemed to be a bit of a sideshow. He has took it serious. I'll give him that. He's yet to take on a proper boxer. Took on faded MMA stars, retired MMA stars, basketballs. I think there's been other YouTube stars. So, credit to Jake Paul for taking this fight with Tommy Fury. I think there's a lot on the line for Tommy Fury here. I think his only get out of jail free card is if, he's kind of sat back, and he won't say this publicly. I mean, you won't hear it from Tyson. You won't hear it from John Fury. What's it if he stepped back there and said, boxing's not for me? Like he's seen the publicity he got from Love Island. He's got this celebrity relationship with Molly May, I think she's called, and just had their daughter. What if he goes down this celebrity route now and this is a cash out fight. He's going to get millions and millions for this. Because if he loses, he can't continue or pursue a career as a boxer with a loss to Jake Paul on his record. We've seen John Fury come out and say, I'll retire him, and Tyson Fury come out and say, I'll leave him in Saudi Arabia if he loses. We know that's all tongue-in-cheek, but genuinely, where would Tommy Fury go with a loss to Jake Paul?
Again, that's something I agree with you. I think the pressure is on Tommy. I think the name brings pressure in itself. And I think the amount of time he's been fighting, he's a fighting man. They're a fighting family. They have been doing it all their life. But I do think if he loses, I don't think there is nowhere for him to go. I think that he will then have to carry on that celebrity life and the YouTube boxing. Because if you lose in the YouTube boxing, they'll have you back to fight again. And I think if he loses here, the professional game for him is done. And I think it's a massive risk for him. Now, I'm not saying we know Jake Paul hasn't had an amateur background, and Tommy's hasn't been massive. But every now and again, you have a fighter that comes through. And as I say, I don't want to be ripped for this. You have a fighter that comes through that hasn't had an amateur background, but they can be great. Deontay Wilder didn't have an amateur background. Now, Jake Paul isn't Deontay Wilder, but I do think at some point we've got to start giving him some credit for the ability that he's got.
Anthony Yarde this week, we've said about his limited amateur background, and he's on the verge of being a world champion. He's pushed the best light heavyweight on the planet to the limit. You know, he had no.
Do you know what? 100%.
And when you look comparing these guys, by the way, you know,
and it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. We're not comparing them at no sort of level, but both of the Paul brothers, when you look back at them and their whole life, they are kind of athletes. And when you're an athlete in that aspect and you're willing to work hard at something, boxing doesn't come natural to everybody. It's about working hard and dedicating yourself. And if you've got some sort of athleticism inside you, which they both have, it's clear to see, and they're willing to dedicate their life to it, they could make something of it. I think Jake Paul's opponents up till now has been just as good as Tommy's. Yes, some of Tommy's on record might have been pro boxers and Jake's haven't been. But if you look at the levels of both of them, they're not far off. So I think at some point we've got to accept that maybe he is a pro boxer and we've got to start looking at him in that way because he's dedicating his life to it and he's improving every fight.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting to see what comes February 26th. You know, first and foremost, this is a fight that, for you know, better or worse, I'm actually looking forward to, just because I want an answer to the argument, Tommy Fury, Jake Paul. So we look forward to that in a weird, macabre kind of way. But Richard, you know, I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast with me today. I'd like to implore our listeners to go over to our YouTube channel, check out our interviews from the beginning of the year. It's been a fire start to the year from SimBoxx. We've interviewed the likes of Roy Jones Jr., Anthony Crawler, George Groves, Moses Atama, which was a huge coup for Rich, his first assignment for SimBoxx, amongst others. I don't want to miss out too many names, but there's a whole host of interviews to be checked out there. It's a big year for SimBoxx. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Make sure you leave a review, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check us out on social media at SimBoxx on Twitter, at sim_box on Instagram. We've got the Facebook page, plenty of content on the way, and thanks for listening.